money is to buy whatever you need. Did you know that's what money's for, to buy whatever you need? But what do people use money for? The very rich use money for power, control, and what does the middle class use money for? Well, I'm going to tell you. Believe it or not, how much of people's lives do they spend trying to keep up with the Joneses? Have you ever met the Joneses? I think they live down the street from us. But the Joneses are driving the Mercedes and the BMW cars, and they send their kids to the expensive school that's a quarter of a mile away. And most people, they send their kids to public schools and they buy Ford or Chevys. And they buy Ford or Chevy trucks. America is obsessed with buying trucks. But the purpose of this discussion is what are you supposed to do with money? Now, let me look around the room and I see one designer top. It says peace on it. Is anybody else wearing a designer shirt that's got somebody's initials on it? Do you have initials of some manufacturer on your shirt?
IDOT, yes.
See, IDOT. So this is keeping up with the Joneses. IDOT has some special significance. He's a designer. And people spend extra money to be able to associate with that designer. This is all part of keeping up with the Joneses. Now, I don't see, are those Nike shoes?
No.
Oh, they look like Nike shoes. Well, Nike shoes run $150, $200. And why do people buy a Nike shoe instead of a lookalike? Because you're obviously wearing a lookalike.
Because it helps you jump 15 feet.
Does it? Or
only the Nikes.
Only the Nikes, because, yes.
Nike is a slave organization.
That's
They beat their workers if they're not working fast enough with the damn shoes.
Thank you.
I refuse to buy those shoes.
Okay, but the public, what we're talking about is keeping up with the Joneses. And the Joneses wear Nike shoes.
Slave shoes.
And what kind of coffee do the Joneses drink?
Colombia.
Colombia. What? Very, very good. The
Valdez.
And where do we buy our coffee at? Starbucks.
Ew, no.
Let's keep up with the Joneses. We buy Starbucks. We buy, they got these long names. I can't even tell you what these long names are. A mucho macho with a bunch of shot of this and a shot of that and a shot of everything else of vanilla, and it costs you $4.50 for a cup of coffee. Well, the Joneses do that. The Joneses are, for the most part, they're the millennials. They're in their 30s, they're making the big salaries, they're designing computer games, and they're making big money. And their parents don't make as much money as their kids do in many cases. And they're all trying to keep up with the Joneses. Now, if you're trying to keep up with the Joneses, you don't have any month left at the end of your money. You run out of money before the end of the month, is what I'm actually saying. But is that what you want to do? Are the Joneses trying to keep up with you? Yes, because they think you're the Joneses. And you think they're the Joneses. And this marketing game that was created by Madison Avenue has got everybody trying to keep up with everybody else. Well, I got to tell you, you're never going to be rich enough. My wife once said to me, and you have to realize that when my wife married me, I was among the richest of people that she knew. And then she says to me, are you ever rich enough that you can buy anything you want at Saks? And I had to think about it, and I finally came back to her and I said, nope, You're never rich enough to buy everything you want at Saks. Because what happens is, before you can afford to go to Saks and buy anything you want, you've already moved up to I-Magnons. Now, I-Magnons isn't even around anymore, but Neiman Marcus is a higher-end store, and you're already going to Neiman Marcus because you can afford to buy a lot of things at Saks Fifth Avenue. And this is this attempt to keep up with the Joneses. So people say, well, aren't you rich? And I go, yeah, but you're talking about rich from your definition or rich from my definition? My rich is I got to be worth $5 billion, $100 billion. I'm trying to keep up with the guys on Wall Street that have run big Fortune 500 corporations and made $1 billion. Most of us in the room, we're just trying to keep up with the guy next door that's making $200,000, and we can't keep up with him. And he's trying to keep up with the guy making $500,000 or $1 million. So everybody's trying to keep up with somebody else. But the end result is what happens. When people retire, they're all broke. Doesn't matter whether they're making the doctor who I met once, and he was making $800,000 a year. Pretty good money, right? His house had a mortgage on it for almost $1 million. And when the Medicare cut off his funding because they said he had some shenanigans, he went broke. Because he had mortgages on everything he owned, because he never said, I got $800,000 a year income. I should be socking away $200,000, $300,000, $400,000. Even if he only socked away $100,000. But he had mortgages and his cars were financed. And he had all this stuff he was spending money on. You go, well, why? Couldn't he pay cash for it? Of course he could have. But his mentality was he was trying to keep up with the other Joneses, which is the other doctor that had a medical practice making $3 million a year. So we're not interested in keeping up with the Joneses. Or are we? But let's look at it another way. Do you want to have wealth, cash, securities, real hard wealth, and real estate, which is the real wealth, at the end of your working career? Or do you want to spend every dime you make during your working career, and when you retire, you live on your $2,000 Medicare? I mean, Social Security. Yeah, Social Security.
Yes.
What's the most important thing? Do you try to keep up with the Joneses and have those designer suits? My uncle was a CPA. And in the 50s, I was old enough to remember my uncle because I was born in 47, and my uncle had custom designed suits. And he was buying custom designed suits in the middle of the Depression, while his father, my grandfather, was raising my father, who was 20 years younger than his older brother, and they had filed bankruptcy, and my father would go to the downtown with his mother to get canned goods because they were living as wards of the state. They didn't have any money during the Depression. Yet, my father's oldest brother bought custom suits because he was a CPA making a lot of money. And then when my father needed to go to college, he didn't have any money. My grandfather didn't have any money. My two uncles, one was a pharmacist and one was a CPA, they only individually agreed to finance my father's college education if he went to school to become their profession. So my father went to school at USC to be a pharmacist. Did my father want to be a pharmacist? No. He didn't have any interest in being a pharmacist. And I never quite got the story why he stopped studying pharmacy and started studying to be a CPA. I only knew that now my other uncle had paid for my father's education. And my father had said to me, why couldn't they just pay for my education. Right? Instead of putting all these strings attached. But they were so engrossed, the two uncles, to keep up with the Joneses. Now, luckily, my next uncle, he did reupholstery. And he never tried to keep up with anybody. And he had a little shop in an industrial complex that my father had bought and built the industrial complex, and my uncle had one little share of it, and he owned that little share of his building. He never kept up with anything. He worked, and he saved his money, and then he went to Vegas for one weekend every 3 months. And he would play the tables. He didn't go to the theaters. He didn't take advantage of the free meals, the free tickets, the free everything they used to give you in the 50s, boy. They thought my uncle was a super millionaire. And when my father would go to Las Vegas and they'd hear the name Michlin, because my uncle had the same last name as my father was treated with royalty because my uncle was a millionaire. My uncle was the poorest member of the family. But he would live for one weekend gambling, and he would throw the money around, and that's all he did with his money, and he loved it. And he saved it. And my father once told me that my uncle was so cheap that the money would rot in his wallet. And I used to laugh about it. And one day when I was about 12 years old, my father said to my uncle, "Why don't you take Willard to lunch?" So he took me to lunch, and when he paid for the lunch and he opened up his wallet and he took the money out, it had been in his wallet so long that it started to fall apart where the fold was. But he didn't try to keep up with the Joneses. They thought he was the Joneses. But he gambled and lost all this money that he made every weekend, one weekend in every quarter. Now, I have a totally different philosophy. And I guess I got my philosophy from my father, which is I save it and put it away and invest it in real estate. And then I'd lose money in a deal and I'd put more money into real estate. But in the end, I never kept up with the Joneses. And guess what my last name is now? Mr. Jones. Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster.